Hello and welcome back. Today we are continuing our lecture series on the First World War, and we're going to start to discuss our movement towards war, America's involvement in the war. Last lecture we talked about kind of the thoughts on neutrality in the United States, and today we're going to, really kind of blow that up, kind of literally and figuratively. There's two really big events that are going to start to push the average American towards agreeing with the fact that we're going to need to go to war on the side of Great Britain. Wilson has been kind of behind the scenes preparing the government for this for a while. He recognizes that we need to, support our partner in democracy, Great Britain. He also recognizes the economic ties, but the average American doesn't get that. They don't understand that it's too complicated, and they're just unaware. What's going to push the average American to war are essentially two things. The first is going to be the Zimmerman note or the Zimmerman telegraph. Zimmerman is the foreign secretary for Germany, and so he's like the Secretary of State for Germany. He's the one that deals with foreign nations. And he recognizes that the German government recognizes that America is slowly inching towards war on the side of Great Britain, and they can't have that. It's a war of attrition, and if America gets involved with, in helping Great Britain, Germany knows they can't win the war. That our industrial production will put Great Britain over the top. Plus, it would be, all kinds of new soldiers that they have to fight, and Germany's barely hanging on as it is. So they come up with a plan. The German government does, just in case America gets involved. And that plan involves Mexico. Mexico doesn't really like us. Remember, the Mexican-American War. We won that war and took a third of Mexico's territory. So, the area of New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and California, Texas, all of that area used to be Mexico. And we have, through two different essential wars, the War for Texas independence and the Mexican-American War, we took all that from them. And so Germany's going to play up that resentment that Mexico has for the United States. And the foreign secretary is going to send a letter. It's actually a telegraph, like a note, telegraph, beep, bop, boop, bop, Morse code, whatever, to Mexico that America's going to intercept. And so we're going to know what Germany's up to. And here's essentially the plan. They're going to say if, and only if America gets involved in the war. So it's not like a preemptive attack. It's if America decides to join the war on the side of Great Britain, Germany is requesting that Mexico should attack the United States. Now, everybody knows that if Mexico attacked the United States, that would not turn out well for Mexico. But both Mexico and Germany knows that Mexico can't beat the United States on their own. And so Germany promised to help with supplies, and once the war was over in Europe, to help Mexico win the war. And what Mexico would get in return for that is the land, that the lost territory. So Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, to get that land back, which Mexico really did desire. So the idea is, if Mexico attacks the United States, that's just a distraction. It will keep us occupied here in North America and not focused on what's going on in Europe, which would give Germany enough time to win and then come help Mexico out. Now, that's only if America enters into the war on Great Britain's side first. Germany doesn't want this, right? They don't want America to get involved at all. And so this is just, a backup plan in case America gets involved in the war. And but when America intercepts it, we leak the information and we put it out into the press. Remember from the previous lecture, one of the things that one of the reasons why we thought we could remain neutral is that we were protected by two oceans. But now Germany just blew that up because now we're not safe because of two oceans. It looks like Germany's trying to find people in the Western Hemisphere, in North America, Central America, to attack us. And so this is going to turn the average American into wanting to strike back at Germany because this is a direct threat to our safety. And so, we're the average American looks at this and thinks, "Whoa, you're going too far. You're going too far here, Germany." And so it's going to push the average American, closer to wanting war with Germany. And so you see, political cartoons like this one where we can see clearly. And again, when we're talking about political cartoons, they play up racial stereotypes. This isn't necessarily to be racist. It's because it's just easily identifiable, and so they take these like tropes and then exaggerate them so everybody kind of knows what they're looking at. So because otherwise they would just have to explain noticeable. The guy on the left of the screen here is clearly a German. He's got the German style helm, the pointy helmet. The guy just above me, wearing a sombrero. All Germans don't wear style helms. All Mexicans don't wear sombreros, right? But it just makes it easily noticeable. And so clearly it's a secret, which is like deceptive and kind of backdoor kind of thing. And in the note, he says, join to Germany and you get a bit of the United States. And then underneath, some promise. And so it makes Germany the enemy. They're conspiring against us with our neighbor to take our land. And so, this is going to resonate with Americans, and they're going to think, oh, like you're trying to pick a fight between us and our neighbor, and we can't tolerate that. And so it is really going to have an effect on the American psyche that we're going to start to view Germany more and more as the enemy and push us closer to war. The next big event that is going to push America towards war, I should say the other big event that's going to push us towards war, is sea rights and free trade in the ocean. Germany, they're in a bit of a predicament. They understand they're fighting a war of attrition, and as long as Great Britain keeps getting resupplied by the United States, they can't win. And so they need Great Britain to run out of guns and ammo and food to be able to win. And so they have pretty successfully blockaded the Allies using technology. Again, this is Germany. Like the Great Britain has the best navy in the world, and they have had for generations had the best navy in the world. And Germany overcomes that with science and technology. And so they utilize a new technology, U-boats, which are the precursors to submarines. And so they're essentially, for our purposes, they are submarines. And so the German U-boats are able to surprise attack and sneak attack these cargo ships that are coming in, and they're doing a good job of stopping supplies. The problem is that's upsetting the United States, because a lot of times that's our stuff that's getting sunk, and it's costing us money and essentially American lives. And so the Germans, they're in a weird predicament. They don't want to sink our ships because that might draw us into war, but they can't let our ships into to supply Great Britain and France. And so what do? Well, they try and walk the line. And so they're sinking ships initially, and they realize that upsets the United States. So they stop sinking ships. And then they realize that too many supplies are getting in to Great Britain and France. And so then they have to start sinking ships again to be able to win this war. But this time they're going to do it in a way that they think is going to keep America out of the war. And so what they essentially say is, look, we're going to start sinking these ships again. And they call it, unrestricted submarine warfare. But what they do is that they telegraph. They say, we don't want to kill your people. And they literally take out newspaper ads in America saying, hey, don't travel on these ships. If you're on a cargo ship, we're going to sink it. Just don't do that. We don't want to kill you. We don't want to start war with you. And so the Americans, we get smart and we say, okay, they're sinking the cargo ships. So then we start putting weapons and supplies on passenger ships, right? Thinking the Germans won't sink that. And the Germans figure that out real quick. They know that we're using passenger ships that are filled with civilians to sneak weapons into Great Britain and France. And so the Germans, again, like, oh, we really don't want to kill civilians because that's definitely going to bring America in the war. And so they start putting in ads again saying, look, your government is putting, and your businesses are putting weapons on passenger ships. We can't allow that to happen. We're going to sink those ships. And they even like list the ships that they know are carrying that stuff, and they'll sink these ships, don't get on them. Well, the American public essentially ignores it. And so you're in a situation here where it's like, what's going to happen is, in 1915, the Germans are going to sink the Lusitania. The Lusitania as a 128 Americans are going to die in the Lusitania. It is a passenger ship, but it is carrying weapons. And the Germans said this was going to happen, and they told Americans, don't get on these ships. But we did it anyway. Our citizens did it anyway. Our government didn't do a good enough job kind of warning us about that, although they did. People got on these ships anyway because, they're doing business in Europe, and the Lusitania sinks. Now, the way it gets played in the media in America is, like, oh, the violent German Huns are attacking civilians now, and it's really going to infuriate Americans. It's not, the entire truth doesn't get out to most Americans that, look, we were shipping guns on it. Now, does that mean that they should still kill civilians? Should the Germans be messing with a neutral country's trade? Probably not. But from the German perspective, they can't win. Their people are dying. The longer this war goes on, they can't win this war as long as those supplies come in. And so it's not, a lot of times the sinking of the Lusitania gets played as good guys versus bad guys. I hate that in history because it's almost never the case. Nobody in history thinks that they're the bad guy. They always think that they're the good guy. And generally, with some exceptions, I think Hitler's a good one, Hitler was pure evil. But most of the time you can't make the good guy, bad guy argument because the world is just too complicated. And so, the sinking of the Lusitania gets played out as, innocent American ship goes down, evil German that sunk it. And that's just not the truth. And it's just more complicated than that. Now, America's not doing anything evil here. They're not doing anything wrong. They're neutral. They're allowed to trade with these other countries. And, putting stuff on ships that have passengers on it, probably not a great idea, but again, not doing anything. They're a neutral nation. They're not doing anything wrong. And so, but from the German perspective, their people are dying. As the longer this war goes on, they have to sink these ships. Tell me who's the good guy in that situation? I would say that the Allied side and the American side is more the good guy and less the bad guy, but it's not clear cut like it's going to get played out in the media in 1915. Lots of civilian ships are carrying these weapons, right? Americans are infuriated by this. They're infuriated that trade is being hampered. They're infuriated that civilians are dying. And this is going to kind of push us closer to war. Now, we're not going to enter the war until, close to 2 years after the sinking of the Lusitania. But it is the step that's going to start to escalate the situation. And so when I talk about the media playing this up, and remember, the vestiges of yellow journalism are still there. Remember that from a previous lecture during the Spanish-American War, that salacious titles or extreme headlines sell newspapers, and war sells newspapers. And so you can look at the New York Times here and look how irresponsible this is. Probably 1,260 dead. No, definitely not. They're playing up the numbers. And so now part of that is they're playing up the numbers because they don't know what the numbers are because they haven't had enough time to fully investigate. But that's also misleading because if you don't know for sure, then you probably shouldn't report it, because reports like this are going to do what? they're going to push they're going to make Americans angry and push Americans closer to war. And so you can see that the newspapers are manipulating the American public to essentially sell newspapers. And so, this isn't exactly what we would call fake news today. This is just really bad reporting because they're not like lying. They're just throwing numbers out there that are estimates because the actual numbers haven't come in. But that's irresponsible too. They know they shouldn't do that. So the Lusitania also bears some responsibility here. This picture of the Lusitania is not a picture of the Lusitania as right before it sank, because we know the Lusitania only was running off of 2 of its smokestacks, all 4 are going in this picture. That's important because the captain of the Lusitania was told that his ship might be targeted and he should speed across as quick as possible to try and outrun U-boats. But to save money on fuel, he was only using 2 of his engines and not all 4, which made it easier for the U-boats to attack him. And so there's some culpability. I mean, it's not the captain's fault that the U-boats are attacking him, but he didn't do everything he could to make the ship safe. So here's a photo of a German U-boat. The German U-boats can submerge so they can kind of patrol unseen. The U-boats, to fire their torpedoes, have to surface to be able to fire those torpedoes. So they're a little different than submarines today, but they're kind of the grandfather of today's. And so we start to see propaganda like this come out because of the sinking of the Lusitania. I want you to really, the picture of the boat sinking, it's an artist rendition of it, and it implies, like, look at all the people who are having to escape on rowboats and whatnot. But I really want you to pay attention to the enlistment propaganda. And so when you take a look at this is an enlistment for the United States Army propaganda, trying to convince men to enlist. And they're really using the implication here clearly, even though it doesn't say Lusitania, it doesn't say sea rights, clearly that is what they're playing off of. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to play upon soldiers' sense of manhood. Right, you see here the murky green water, and a woman. It's no coincidence that it's a woman and a child in white. Innocence. They're playing up on a man's job to protect his family. It's a man's job to protect the innocent and helpless. And so, it's essentially saying, hey, men, if you're a real man, you're not going to let this happen to women and children. You're going to enlist to defend the innocent, to defend the weak, and to defend, your families. So, at this point, Wilson is still hesitant. We've talked about that several times because of the strong isolationist attitudes at home and these torn European loyalties. We've talked about that in previous lectures. But he's starting to recognize that trade is being crippled, that we have these strong ties to democracy in Great Britain, and because of things like the Zimmerman telegraph, we're not as safe as we thought. And so we're going to start to see Wilson prepare behind the scenes for war. And so a couple of the things that he does are going to be very specific laws that are going to increase the size of the Army and the Navy. And so he's going to present these plans to Congress, and there's going to be some resistance there. The progressives are going to say we shouldn't be spending money on the military. We should be spending money on domestic things here at home, helping society. Pacifists like William Jennings Bryan, who was the Secretary of State for Woodrow Wilson, are going to oppose the war because they just oppose violence in general. So there will be resistance there. But there are other people that are going to say it's not enough. One of those people is Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt, ever since he was president, William Howard Taft took over. He didn't like what Taft did. He ran for office against Wilson and Taft and lost. He probably would have won if it would have just been Roosevelt versus Wilson, and he would have got a third term, but he lost. He views this war as his opportunity to become president again, because he views Wilson as this soft intellectual progressive, even though Roosevelt's a progressive too. He's a different type of progressive for sure. And he thinks war is his time to shine. And he thinks if America goes to war, Wilson will, botch it up and not do as well, and that will lead him to being elected again. But he also thinks it's good for America. He thinks it's good to protect democracy. And remember from previous lectures during the Spanish-American War, he believes that it's a man's opportunity to test his mettle, to see what you're made of. So he's going to be a war hawk. So what are Wilson's plans? What's he actually going to get passed? Well, one of the first things is going to be the National Defense Act, the NDA. That's going to expand the regular army from 90,000 to 175,000, and then eventually up to 223,000. America just doesn't have a long history of a large standing army. I know that's weird to hear today because we have the largest standing army in the world today, but that's only after World War II. Before World War II, we would build up our army during a time of war, and then in peacetime, we would essentially dismantle it, except a bare bones kind of structure. So we got to build it back up. And so we're going to build up the army to 223,000 and then authorize just under 500,000 more members of the National Guard, or build up to just under 500,000 National Guard members. That's not going to be enough. Germany's got 3.5 million soldiers. We're going to need, significantly more than this, but this is a start. And the important thing is these people are being trained ahead of time, right? Most of our soldiers, we're going to have to train after we've entered the war. And so we're not going to be ready to fight on day one. This is just to build up enough people that are trained that if we do have to enter the war, we have some trained fighters. And then if we're going to fight a war in Europe, guess what we're going to need? We're definitely going to need a Navy, because they're going to be Navy guys, I think, hate to hear this, but they're going to be the taxi service that are going to get the people, the soldiers that are going to have to fight on the ground over to Europe. The Navy's much more than a taxi service, by the way. They're going to be the ones that have to beat the German blockade and take out the U-boats that the British weren't capable of doing, and it's going to be our Navy that does this. So they're vital to this war effort. But we absolutely can't fight in Europe if we can't get our troops there, and so we need a larger Navy. And so this is going to be much easier to get passed through Congress than the National Defense Act, because the Navy doesn't just service as boots on the ground soldiers. It protects our trade. And so most people agree we need to have a stronger Navy to be able to protect all of our trade. And so we'll get between $500-600 million to help rebuild the Navy. Again, not enough. Teddy Roosevelt, before the Spanish-American War, helped build up our Navy and modernize it. So we do have a modern Navy, but it's not as modern as the German Navy. And so we have to catch up to the Germans if we're going to be able to beat the Germans. And so this is going to be a good step in the right direction. Progressives, by this point, really feel like, okay, if we're going to get involved in this war, because progressives believe in democracy, they believe in capitalism, they just want a regulated form of capitalism. And so they say, look, if we're going to have to get in this war and we're going to have to protect trade and we're going to have to protect democracy, then honestly, the rich should be paying for it. And so, it's businesses, these munitions factories, large agro farms, although, we don't have a ton of agro farms back then, but we do have some, are profiting from the war, which is true. But average people are profiting from the war too. They're getting jobs and we're selling our abundance of stuff. But the companies are profiting more, so they should have to pay for it. And so we're going to see a doubling of the income tax. Now, the income tax is a progressive income tax. And because it's a progressive income tax, it means the rich pay more. Now, today, our income tax rates have changed all over the place. Today, the rich could pay up to a third in federal income tax, a little bit more than that, I think. I'm not sure because the rates have changed within the last couple of years, and I'm not super rich, so I don't really know. But it's a little bit more than a third, and about half once you factor in state taxes and all that stuff. And so, and then the bottom 50% don't pay any taxes at all. That's today. Well, back in the 1900s, it wasn't that way. It's essentially only the rich paid. And so what we have is, the tax that's going to get passed is called the Revenue Act of 1916. And taxes go from essentially, there's like two different brackets. It goes from 1 to 2% to 6 to 13%. So the tax rates would be considered low today. There's one point in American history, and where you're talking after the Great Society, when Johnson just dramatically increases federal spending, that taxes on the wealthiest people can get up to like 80 and 90%. I mean, just super super high. So this is peanuts compared to that. So you see also, besides the income tax, you're going to see tax increase on ammunition makers, because they're the ones that are going to make huge amounts of money here, because we're supplying ammo not just for Americans but for the British and the French. So that's going to go up to 12.5%. And so, all of these different things, there's going to be an excise tax on luxury goods as well. So that's, again, another way to make sure that the rich pay more. And, that's a thing that in America, pretty much everybody agrees upon. I mean, there's some people out there that want a flat tax, but that's a very small minority. Even the rich recognize that, they should pay more. And so progressives really kind of push that idea. And today, it's true. You've got the top 1% pays 50% of all the taxes, and the top 10% pay something like 85%, and the bottom 50% don't. They get their money back. They still pay taxes. They pay sales taxes and stuff, but they get their federal taxes back. So, which is a progressive idea that they maintained through World War I. So we'll see by the election of 1916, Wilson is going to be able to win with 49.2% of the votes. He beats Charles Evans Hughes. And so the country's kind of divided, but we're going to see that, Wilson is able to pull this victory out, and largely because his push for peace and progressivism, right? He's trying to focus on domestic issues, and is promising to keep us out of the war. After he gets elected, shortly after he gets elected on April 6, 1917, America will ultimately enter the war. We enter a war for multiple reasons. One, our historical ties to England, which is language, religion, and democracy, the effective Allied propaganda. The average person believes that the Germans are the violent Huns because of the lies about what happened in Belgium, but also because of the sinking of the Lusitania and the Zimmerman. C writes, Germany is messing with our trade, and we're upset about that. The Zimmerman telegraph and the sinking of the Lusitania. I guess you can attach sinking of the Lusitania into the sea rights. Okay, that concludes our lecture for today. Thank you for your time. We will pick up tomorrow with the Russian Revolution, and how that will necessitate American involvement in the war. Thank you very much for your time. Have a good day. I will see you soon.